Namaskar. I, Bhavik Mahant, on behalf of Vivekananda Study Circle, welcome everyone to our special lecture for this semester on Swami Vivekananda and Youth, Leading India in the 21st Century by Shri Sharad Sagar. The founder and CEO of Dexterity Global is an Indian youth icon, a globally renowned social entrepreneur, and a 21st century leader. He founded Dexterity Global in 2008 at the age of 16, which provides educational resources and training to schools in South Asia and impacts over 1.2 million children annually. And his organization has enabled young students to secure over rupees 40 crores in scholarships from institutions around the world. A graduate of Tufts University, Saradji broke all major records in entrepreneurship and leadership in the institute and was the first Indian ever in the recorded history of the institute to deliver the graduation speech at the Tufts University, a speech that receives the long rousing standing ovation from over 4,000 people at the ceremony. In 2015, Sarad became one of the youngest entrepreneurs to find a place in the entrepreneurship syllabus of the Michigan State University, one of the top 100 US universities in the world. He found a mention in the Government of Taiwan School Impact Agenda at the Social Enterprise World Forum in Milan, Italy, alongside Bill Drayton, the father of social entrepreneurship. President Barack Obama invited him to the White House. Forbes listed him on the global Forbes 30 under 30 list. The Rockefeller Foundation inducted him in the list of the 100 Next Century Innovators. The Nobel Peace Center invited him to the Nobel Peace Prize Ceremony. And the Queen of England included him in the Queen's Young Leaders. Powering his vision of creating a 21st century leadership to fight the 21st century challenges, Sarad has spoken globally and been invited to some of the world's most prestigious and influential institutions, including the United Nations, World Bank, White House, Harvard, IITs, and IIMs. Sarad declined master's admission offer from Harvard University in May 16 and returned to India to continue working for children and youth. That is the spirit of love for India that he has developed. It is a pleasure to have him here for today. Therefore, without any further delay, I welcome Shri Sharad Sagar to address the gathering.
I offer my pranams to Shri Ramakrishna Dev, Ma Sharada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda with the presence of Swamiji's portrait here on the stage. I offer my pranams to Swami Mahamedanandji Maharaj, editor Vedant Kesari and your spiritual mentor for Vivekananda Study Circle, to Professor Balaji, who's present here, and my namaskars to all my young friends who are in attendance today. Thank you for having me. I am looking forward to a good enough conversation with you. One of the major problems that has happened in our country today is that when you go to a school or a college and you ask a teacher, who are the good students? They'll tell you, oh, these are our best students, these 5 kids. They do not waste their time. They're always listening to motivational videos. They are always trying to attend sessions of motivational speakers. And as good as it sounds, we've done something unfortunate in our country. We have built this industry of motivational speaking and a generation that is being fed by it. So day after day, video after video, browsing after browsing, you come across somebody who's telling you the story of how he was chased by a dog one time. So this person tells you that I was crossing a street one day and I saw this dog. And in adjectives that your Tamil teacher, your English teacher, or your Hindi teacher could not teach you, he uses all those adjectives to define what the dog looked like. Sharp teeth and this size and whatnot. And then this person says that all of a sudden, this dog started chasing me. And then this person goes that, then I began running, and then I am running, and the dog is running, and I am running, and the dog is running. He says the same thing 6 times in one breath. And many of you listen with this attentiveness, not realizing he practices that every evening because that's his day job. All of a sudden this person says that, and all of a sudden I stopped. And I stopped and I saw the dog stopped. And then I looked at the dog and the dog looked at me. And then I smiled. The moment I smiled, I saw the dog also started smiling. And that is the day I realized that when a problem comes in front of you, you smile. And many of you, young, bright and talented, as great as one can get, sit down there with a term exam the next morning, with a job interview the next evening, and you're sitting down and smiling. Never realizing 2 things. 1, dogs don't smile. 2, this story is copied from a story that was the lived experience of Swamiji. Swami Vivekananda there was this group of monkeys that tried to stop his way, and there's this story that many of you must be familiar with. It is now titled Face the Brutes. And that story, you see, has been adapted by so many people. Monkeys have changed into dogs. People have put themselves in the story. But what has unfortunately not happened is an understanding that we don't get happy by watching a motivational video every morning, how to be happy. We've built a generation successfully enough, but sadly, that gets up in the morning and feels that I am not feeling very, happy right now. So they Google how to be happy. And there's a motivational speaker who's speaking, every day get up in the morning, say 5 times, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, and you'll be happy. And then they don't find themselves dedicated enough to work. So they Google how to be dedicated. And then somebody who's never been dedicated in life, not been dedicated even in producing that video, is now talking about being dedicated. So the reason why I said that distinction right away is, I am not here to give you a motivational speech. I'm here to talk sense. Hopefully. You are the one who'll tell me whether we talked sense or not. But that is my effort. And in this process, there is a distinction we need to make. You want to be a mechanical engineer. Me standing here and saying that, yes, you can be a mechanical engineer. Yes, you can be a mechanical engineer, might not do too much in your grade sheets and your transcripts and your career prospects. You need a pathway. Professor Balaji saying that might help you. Right? Swami Mahamedhananji Maharaj giving you the know-how to really tame your mind and train it. That might help you. Right? So Swami Vivekananda, when he talks about that story, which is his lived experience, also in his lifetime, in his life, through his work, through his message, gives you this entire pathway, this entire guidebook that enables you to face the brutes, not just in the streets, not just in animal form, but everywhere, as challenges, as people, as those who want to stop you, as complex situations where you need that courage, right? So that is the reason why the first distinction I hope to make is that sitting here at IIT Madras, you're not a part of the crowd that is just looking for motivational talks, okay? There's a fun way I try and explain it to my middle school and high school children who I get to work with all across the country. I ask them that if there is a child who's 4 feet tall, and I make him stand on a 2 feet wooden block, what's his height now? Oh, now I feel I'm speaking at an IIT. There are some IITs, irrespective, there are some IITs where they say 6 feet. His momentary elevation is 6 feet. The height is still 4 feet. If there's a child who weighs 40 kgs, and I put 2 10 kg weights on that child, what's his weight now? His weight is still 40 kgs. The extra 20 kg is the burden that he's putting on the planet through him. So now when the 4 feet tall child wants to be 6 feet, and you tell me that standing on the wooden block doesn't count, how do we accept that in our own real lives? listening to that 5-minute motivational talk with somebody who's probably not happy or successful or dedicated himself or herself doesn't help. So the answer I'll take from that example itself, and then I promise you I'll talk about India in the 21st century, the buzzwords. But that is what it is? Yes. So if the child wants to go from being 4 feet tall to 6 feet tall, what all the child needs to do? He needs to eat better. He needs to exercise more. He needs to make sure that he is well exercised, well nourished, and everything else. And he needs to start young. You cannot start exercising at the age of 45 and grow from 4 feet 5 to 6 feet 5, can you? There are way too many of us who are waiting to become bureaucrats and then take a few moral value classes at the Academy of Administration in Missouri. There are way too many of us who are waiting that once we get into our office rooms, we'll show good character. There are way too many of us who are waiting for leadership to happen when leadership position comes by. And that is the reason why it is important that I set this distinction clear. That this conversation is a conversation about how we can fundamentally get better so that people around us get better as well. This conversation is not a motivational talk that asks you to repeat 5 times that you're happy and happy you shall get. And this conversation is to draw you towards the more fundamental questions and answers that should come from within and be processed well within. Hopefully, by the greatest guidance that you can receive as a young person from the life, work, and teachings of Swami Vivekananda. Because there is no dog story taking place there. There's a story that has enabled so many who came before us and so many who are alive today to make tangible impact in their lives and that of others. So that is the reason why instead of YouTube and youth, we need a Swami Vivekananda and youth conversation. But largely, I'm going to talk about the second part of it. Swami Vivekananda and youth leading India in the 21st century, because there cannot be a better place to have this conversation than at an IIT. You know that the places that you occupy in this auditorium right now are dream places for our children, probably ever since they are 3 years old or 4 years old. Somebody begins to tell them or their neighbors that my child is going to IIT one day. While these children are in school for around 12 years, each year, increasingly, this word is repeated, not just as a goal, but also as a deep aspiration or dream, and sometimes with great sanctity. There are way too many in this country who still wish, despite having done well in their lives, that if they could have walked an IIT campus, they would have felt more fulfilled. So there is definitely something that is attached to your institution. There is something that this country looks forward to. Only then, a country as poor as ours in 1947, post-independence, that could have spent on a lot of other things. It took deep willpower of the founding fathers of this country, the generation that decided to shape this country for the better, that they invested in educating its young people so that we continue to advance in physical sciences. As leadership coming from these institutions could also lift other people up through those advancements. But this is a fitting place to have this conversation about India in the 21st century and that leadership. Just to give you a little bit of background before I get into the details of it, I've not come with a 10-point plan or a 5-point agenda that can change India. I've come with 2 very simple stories. One story is from my life, and that is how I came to be here, but not in something that is about rounds of applauses or a cinema script, but more in those technical details that I've been able to trace back and look at that make a fundamental difference in any life. You don't need to be a genius in order to decode those things. It is just way too sad that we do not give every child that access. And the second story is the larger story of the work that I do, which is directly inspired from Swamiji's life and work and is directly committed to nation building in 21st century. So I think, as wide a mistake as it might have been to invite me, things might still fall right in place. So I said the mistake part not for the organizing committee. You know, usually when I come to speak, people think that somebody much older should have come. So I apologize for my age, but not at all for the lived experiences. So, good enough. To give you a quick background, I was introduced with very many challenging things that might have set expectations very high. If I was simply introduced as a young boy from Bihar who will come here and speak in English, I think by now you would have been impressed. So, I'm just going to give you a quick background of where I come from and how I got to the place where I am today. I was born in a small village of Bihar, a place by the name of Ziradeh, in a district named Siwan. And this was in the 1990s. For those of you who are not from Bihar, from the rest of the country, your relationship with my home state was through newspapers and television channels. And it was more often than not about negative news, if at all you looked at Bihar. I grew up in similar times in the 1990s. My father worked for the State Bank of India, never took a promotion in 25 years of service, only took a voluntary retirement after we went to college, never took a promotion. So he joined as an assistant or something. He retired as a special assistant, so only the promotion that he received was a forcible promotion that you get. All of the promotions he decided to forego so that he could teach us. But he was posted in small villages of Bihar. And these are places where we grew up. No good schools, no good libraries. Some places did not even have a police station or a post office. My parents were concerned how they would educate me and my two siblings. So they came up with a threefold way of educating us. They were no policy writers, no curriculum designers, but with great faith and great audacity, they took this decision that we're going to teach our kids at home. So in these small towns and villages, I was educated in a threefold manner. The first part of my education was very interesting, but I think the software comes from that. My parents, in the small rented houses that we lived in small towns and villages of Bihar, on every single wall of the small houses that we lived in, they pasted quotations in English and in Hindi of Sri Ramakrishna Dev, Holy Mother Sharada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, great men and women of our time and those who came before us. And every morning, even before we got to anything, it was mandated that we had to go around the house and read these quotations aloud. And this is something that we did for several years, one after the other. Besides, of course, reading books that came from the Ramakrishna Vivekananda literature. But this was the first part of my education, every morning waking up and reading these quotations aloud in English and in Hindi. The second part of my education was interesting as well. My parents made it mandatory for us to read newspapers. To give you some context, newspapers in this part of the country, in these parts of the country, came one day late. Magazines sometimes even a month later. But it was mandated that we read newspapers. So if you read about India winning a cricket match tomorrow, I would read about it 2 days later. But reading these newspapers, I would read stories of young men and women from all across India, mostly from our major towns, like metropolitans, major cities, who would win competitions, who would secure full scholarships, who would represent India at global platforms and international forums. And I used to wonder if I could do the same. But I was a small child, not enrolled in any academic institution, and thus not entitled to participation in any of these competitions or scholarship opportunities or conferences. So I picked up a very simple habit. And for those of you who are interested in the power of a good habit, maybe this will tell you that. I picked up a very small habit every time I read a newspaper article about some child who had won a competition or scholarship or represented India. I would write down the name of the competition or the scholarship or the platform, who can participate, when does it take place, and how do you participate. Whatever little information that I could extract from that newspaper article. I kept doing this for several years. Fast forward that story, by the time I was 12, my elder siblings had to write their board exams. And for that reason, we moved to the capital city of Bihar, the city of Patna, with my mother. My father continued to be posted in these rural areas. He would commute 250 kilometers Saturday evening to be with us all day Sunday. Sunday late night, he would commute 250 kilometers again to be back at his office. The reason why I mention is because far too many of us have been sold the idea of self-made man or self-made woman, never realizing how many have contributed to this journey and in what challenging circumstances. But I find it important to mention that. So we come to the capital city of Bihar, get enrolled in a school on scholarship, and the three of us go to school there. I was the one who went to school for the longest, so my parents always told me that you are at the greatest risk of getting spoiled. But I do not know how I turned up, but all my time in school, I started participating in all of these competitions, one after the other. Local, national, and global. I participated in every single competition. Cutting that story short, by the time I was graduating high school, I had represented India in over 6 different countries and won over 200 different competitions. Now, this was something that many people back in my hometown, back in the local media, found very praiseworthy. You see, parents of your friends, teachers, everyone in the colony, they would be like, oh, you should be like him, he's such a great kid. But I found something very different. I would come back from a Japan or a South Korea, wherever I was representing India, and as a standard 9th student would, as a standard 10th student would, I would tell my friends stories about the flights that we took, the hotels that we stayed in, how broad the roads were in Seoul, South Korea, or how clean the city was in Japan. And I would tell my friends these stories, but I would also share something that would go on to change my life and many other lives after that. I would also tell them the questions that were asked at these global platforms, the answers that young people were giving, sometimes to wrong, sometimes that they were getting wrong. And many a times I found out that my friend who came from some other district of Bihar or some other small town or village, who sat right next to me in a classroom, knew answers to questions that many kids missed at a national or international platform. And I would find myself saying it to my young friends that, oh, you should have been there. You should have participated. Many a times I would discuss at these UN global platforms the ideas that were put forward. And my friends sometimes had ideas that were much brighter and creative solutions that sounded much more interesting than any idea that was put forward at the global platform. And again, I would tell them that you should have been there. But I was quick enough to realize that my parents, my friends who worked as hard, whose parents had as big dreams for their children, these kids who were as smart, they could have been at these platforms as well. The reason why they were not at these platforms was simple. They did not know that these opportunities existed. That second part of my education was different. And that told me that all these opportunities exist in the world. That is the reason why I could participate, I could win or lose or do whatever. The third part of my education was simple. Textbooks and notebooks were brought home till I was 12 years old, and we had to self-teach ourselves and our parents would teach us. Now, many people, when they hear homeschooling, they think that teachers come and teach. In our case, there were no teachers. Parents would teach, and we had to self-teach. But this is largely the story of my homeschooling till the age of 12, and then graduating high school. I received a full scholarship of around 4 crores to go to the United States to study, and then I returned, as was announced, and then I continued doing the work that I started in 2008. So now it will be much easier for you to understand the work that I do. In 2008, while still in high school, inspired by the stories of my friends and these conversations, I decided to build a platform that would connect every single child with educational opportunities the moment they go live. You see, we live in a world where NASA Space Settlement Contest is an important competition. And children who go on to win these competitions are put on newspaper front pages, on primetime television, and celebrated as the next Einsteins or Newtons or Teslas of the world, never realizing that the maximum number of entries that NASA has ever received for this competition that is specially for high school students is 952 from all across the world. Probably there are more than 900 kids who participate in a local painting competition right here in Chennai. But this global competition of such great repute and prestige, 952 is the maximum number of participants. This is not because our kids don't know solar system or gravity, or are uninterested in science, or are wasting too much time on WhatsApp or Facebook. This is because they do not know that this opportunity exists. And that is the reason why in 2008 we founded Dexterity with two very simple ideas. And those two simple ideas are as related because they are derived all from Swamiji's teachings, what his vision for young people in this country was. And they are as dedicated to nation building as can be in this life that I have. So there were two simple ideas that we started out with. And these two simple ideas are important not just because Dexterity started with it, but because we do not need Dexterity to take these forward. You can take it forward as well. At Dexterity, we say this often, that we are not a shoe store that wants to make sure that people buy all their footwear from our shoe shop. We are about ensuring that everybody has something under their feet. And that is a collective task. And that is the reason why this thought leadership, we find it so important. So the two ideas we started with were, the first one was, if there is an opportunity for our children and youth, they should be the first ones to know about it. And for that reason, in 2008, we built something called Dex Connect that connects young people with opportunities from all across the world, all opportunities, local, national, and global, every single month, right there in their own classrooms and homes. Because we also believed that these opportunities should be where our children are. Now, this is the first part. But the second part of Dexterity's thought process is even more important. In 2008, we had the audacity to say that we are on a mission to power the next generation of leaders through educational opportunities. We did not call ourselves an educational organization. We did not call ourselves a literacy organization. We did not call ourselves an opportunities discovery organization. We called ourselves a leadership building organization. And that is for a very simple reason. For too long in this country, we have separated our education from our leadership. For too long, we have told our children at some of our best institutions that leadership and education are separate. For too long in this country, we've made leadership synonymous to political leadership, and political leadership synonymous to bad leadership, forgetting to tell our children that in the 1960s and 70s in this country, when we debated internal security, when we questioned what would happen if America tries to bully us, what would happen if China tries to encroach upon, or what would happen if Pakistan tries to attack us, the answer to that question came in the education of a young boy in the holy city of Rameshwaram, who went on from being a Kalam to a Dr. Kalam to a missile man Kalam, a missile man Kalam to a President Kalam, and still stayed at ease with a child 5 years old and a prime minister 5 years into office, who still walked into a president's office with 2 suitcases and walked out of it with the same, who chose retirement and teaching over an entire contested election right after that. But the reason why I'm talking about Kalam is that if that is not leadership through science, then what is? If that is not leadership through statesmanship, what is? In this country in the 1990s, when we opened our economy to the rest of the world, a cricketer's name became an adjective for good performance. In office rooms and in classrooms across this country, we started saying that this person has played a Sachin Tendulkar innings today. Is that not leadership through sports? In this country, when we got independence, it is said that when the first Prime Minister of India heard patriotic songs from Lata Mangeshkar, Pandit Nehru was in tears. Is that not leadership through music? A generation of freedom fighters in this country committed themselves to freedom and fighting for it, also inspired by a painting made by Abanindranath Tagore, who in turn was inspired by Sister Nivedita. Is that not leadership through art? Then what is? This is something that we've forgotten to tell our young kids in classrooms all across this country. That can be a weak, broken, dilapidated government school in some part of Bihar, and that can be right here at IIT Madras. And that is a challenge. We cannot talk about nation building, and we cannot talk about India in 21st century. We cannot talk even about Swamiji if we choose to detach our leadership from our education. And that is the reason why in 2008 we audaciously said we are on a mission to power the next generation of leaders through educational opportunities. Because at these global platforms where I went and where I hoped my friends should come too, I saw something else as well. The young people who represented India at these global platforms did not always come from a background like mine. They did not come from small towns and villages of India. Many of them came from international schools and world schools that are found in the outskirts of our major cities, where sometimes the school fee is 4 to 5 times the average salary of a common Indian father or mother. And these children, as much as I respect their talent and their ability to empathize, I would often find myself wondering that at this platform where we are discussing access to clean drinking water, probably the lived experience of a young girl child in a village of Rajasthan who has seen her mother go 1.5 kilometers or 1.5 hours to fetch drinking water, maybe her lived experiences and her reflection can offer better perspectives and better creative solutions to this problem. But the only issue is this child doesn't know that platform, and that platform doesn't know this child. And for too long in our country, as we have continued to separate education and leadership, we have also adopted this foreign idea of parachuting leadership, where somebody who studied in Mumbai is expected to know Muzaffarpur better, where it is expected that your education in Bangalore might just make you a masiha for a place called Bihta in Bihar. And that is a problem. We cannot parachute leadership in this country. We need to build leadership bottom up in communities that need it the most and have it the least. That means lifting the community of probably the poorest of poor kids who have seen lack of clean drinking water or better electricity supply or the presence of that first school. We need to build leadership right there in that community that will lift them up, that will lift India up. This social media fighting that I was briefly talking to one of your friends about before I started today is not going to lift people up. This just getting a degree or just making a small donation is not enough. But that is the reason why in 2008 we started with that mission. At Dexterity, we have a very simple idea of leadership. It is not coined by me. Of course, it has taken a lot of consensus building with our young children in high schools and middle schools across the country, but it is deeply and greatly inspired by Swamiji's call. You see, Swami Vivekananda, who so many see as one of the greatest icons in human history. So many see him as someone who could literally prophesy things, including freedom of this country 50 years after he said it in 1897. Swami Vivekananda said something incredible. He said that the coming glory of this country shall be so great that its ancient glory that was great in itself will fade in front of it, that will look nothing compared to its coming glory. Now skeptics can say that Swamiji was doing wishful thinking. He was being too optimistic. He did not realize the challenges. But I want to repeat some of the things that Swamiji said one after the other to set the tone for our conversation today about leading India in the 21st century. When Swamiji said this, if you as a skeptic want to ask that question that, oh, he didn't think deep enough or bright enough or long enough, he wasn't visionary enough if you think, or if you think he was doing wishful thinking, then he said something else too. He said right after, like there's a quotation that I'm just adding. Swamiji, if he said that India's coming glory will be so great, he also said, my faith lies in the younger generation, the modern generation. Out of them will come my workers who will work out this whole problem like lions. He just doesn't stop there. There's another thing that he says about these workers and what you are pursuing at IIT Madras, that education is the manifestation of perfection within. It just doesn't stop there, because some of you can still question that, oh no, my perfection is a little less than his perfection, that she is a little smarter than I am. One of the greatest spiritual giants of all times says something that probably no spiritual leader would have said himself or herself. He says, no one can make you spiritual. He also says, each soul is potentially divine. But the reason why I said all of this was, if you see Swamiji, he doesn't talk about stopping the way of a dog or smiling at him when he stops. He says that my mission or my goal, the words that he chooses, only he could, but the meaning that I take is, he says that my mission is to preach unto mankind their divinity, and enable them to manifest that divinity in every movement, in every moment. Now, all these things having said, it is important to start from you now. Instead of going from Swamiji to you, it is important to go from you to Swamiji, or you to Swamiji's call. So the reason why I chose to come to IIT Madras today was not to make a speech. It was to come here and ask you if you are willing to respond to that call. If you are the generation that will respond to that call of fixing those problems, working out these problems like lions. If you start with that fundamental understanding that yes, you are potentially divine, that yes, you can manifest that divinity, that yes, your education is the manifestation of perfection already within, that you will be guided by what Swami Vivekananda put out as the national ideal for India, renunciation and service. And now way too many of you, some of you might just be thinking that you have to leave everything and then start donating or do some social work. And then there are some of you who might be thinking what I'm saying is not practical enough. There are a few things I want to talk about because of that. But in general, at Dexterity, this idea of leadership, inspired by all of this, is very simple. We know well, and we teach our children, and they teach many others, with this reflected in their character, with this resounding in their conversations, that leadership is not the procurement of a position. It is the refinement of the personality. We do not wait to lift people up till we have been sworn in as the Prime Minister of a country. We do not wait to do something till we have been brought in as the product manager of a company. We do not wait till we become journalists to report critically or write thoughtfully. Leadership is about refinement of that personality. The unfortunate idea of leadership that we have peddled through newspapers and tabloids and magazines and primetime television has told way too many of us that leadership is about name chanting, that leadership is about TV cameras, that leadership is about apparent power and influence. When I ask this question in elite educated audiences like yours, that how many of you want to become leaders, very few hands go up. If I ask the question, how many of you want to become netas, most people just giggle. The same question when I ask in public maidans across this country, talking to our young kids in small towns and villages, the story is the same. Because the leader that they know is either this textbook definition of leadership that is coming from television and mass media, or it is someone too inaccessible, too unapproachable. So that is the reason why we find it important to define it for our young children. And the idea of leadership our kids take forward is leadership is your ability to deliver value through whatever limited expertise that you have. This idea brings in our mothers who wake up every morning before anyone has and work hard till late by the time everyone has started taking rest, who either run the house or the house and an office, whatever it is. But our mothers are leaders too, but they do not fall in this definition. But you see, it doesn't affect them so much because many of them are middle-aged. Many of them are still continuing to do what they're doing with a very much higher idea and ideal. But the disservice we do to this country is when we exclude that girl child who tomorrow, when a government school in Chennai gives over, who this standard 10th girl child, who waits for 5 minutes or 10 minutes after the government school has given over and helps a standard 8th girl child with 2 math problems. She is a leader as well, and as much. Some child somewhere in this country who doesn't know good English or good Hindi, but knows limited Tamil or Telugu or Gujarati or Kannada or Telugu, and writes an application for an old widow, an old mother, for a widow pension card, that child is a leader as well. Some child somewhere in this country who has taken a small initiative in the classroom to teach a few more kids or to share his notes copies with others, that child is a leader as well. And that is a leadership that we need to start practicing. That is a leadership that should be there in every moment. That leadership is initiative. That leadership is service. What a 5-year-old child does when he helps his 3-year-old sibling walk is leadership. And what a 15-year-old child does when she helps a 13-year-old child with 2 math problems is leadership. But there is something important we need to see and understand. The 5-year-old child, his ability is limited. The maximum that child knows is how to walk and how to give support. So with that limited expertise, that child is delivering value. That is the reason why that child is a leader. 10 years later, that child has now learned how to write, has learned a few new concepts in science and math, and is delivering value with that. That's the reason why that child is a leader. It is these children who, with that idea of leadership, continue growing, who go on to be the Kalams, Kurians, Sridharans, Sarabhais, Swaminathans in this country, who have fundamentally changed this world. And that is the reason why Dexterity is continuing to work on a very simple mission. As we talk about powering the next generation of leaders through educational opportunities, we also talk about by reintroducing purpose in education and service in leadership. And that is the reason why I come here today. And that is the reason why we are having this conversation. On one end, this country fails to educate so many. And on the other end, I don't know what kind of education it gives to the others. That the first thing that they leave is the community they come from, the city that they come from, and sometimes even the values that they should have always stayed grounded in. Now, way too many of you might still dispute that, you know what, this is too optimistic a thought. This country cannot have this other leadership in science and music and other things that you're talking about. But you know what? We might have stopped telling you this, but in this country, it is only because of those people who put their head down at their study table and worked incredibly hard, because of whom we are able to lift our head up and call ourselves proud Indians. If this country is a strong space power or nuclear power or anything that it is because of that generation that worked for it. And you are not to be blamed for this. And I'll give you the concept of this education and leadership and how that gap has come in, which we proudly say at Dexterity we are working to bridge the gap between education and leadership and reintroduce purpose in education and service in leadership. When we say that, there is an example we like to give, and I hope it appeals to you. In this country, when we talk about leaders, the greatest generation of leaders a country can have can be its generation of freedom fighters. By the way, all of them were inspired by Swami Vivekananda. The first Prime Minister of this country called him a fountainhead of inspiration. The father of the nation said that his love for this country grew manifold, grew 1,000-fold actually, when he read Swami Vivekananda for the first time. The great Gurudev who wrote the national anthem, he advised people that if you want to understand India, you read Vivekananda, there is nothing negative in him, only positive. But that generation of freedom fighters, when we talk about them in this country, I know when we talk about a Gandhi in this country, the only thing that our young kids know about Gandhi is that the Mahatma talked about Satyagraha and fought for it. And so they hear non-violence and Satyagraha in their social science books. And the only other thing that we hear about Gandhi is that he was thrown out of a train. When we talk about Nehru, we talk about the first Prime Minister, we talk about a rose, we talk about the sobriquet of Chacha. When we talk about a Patel in this country, we limit him to iron, and we talk about just in recent days his bringing this country together. When we talk about an Ambedkar in this country, we just talk about a poor kid who went on to give this country its constitution. Never telling our children that this greatest generation of leaders that this country saw, their leadership was deeply rooted in their education. We have never told our children, we have told them what Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Ambedkar were doing when they were in their 60s and 70s, and we have never told them what they were doing when they were 16 and 17. Thereby devoiding an entire generation of that ability to build themselves. By giving them this thought that people like Gandhi comes once in a century or once in a millennium, asking them to give up way too early and at a time when it might have been most suited for this country to build that next generation leader. But when we look at a Mahatma Gandhi, when he was your age, he was studying at a place called University College in London, which was one of the best universities in the world then and continues to be today. That the moment when he was thrown out of a train in Pietermaritzburg in South Africa, he was reading a book called War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. That Gandhi, by the time he was the age of an average Indian leader, had written more books than many of our leaders today have read. That when we talk about a Nehru, his education took place at places like Harrow and Cambridge, some of the greatest institutions then and even today. That a Sardar Patel was educated at a place called Middle Temple College, that an Ambedkar received a scholarship from a person by the name of Maharaja Sayaji Rao Gaikwad, the Maharaja of Baroda, who by the way was influenced by Swami Vivekananda. And that scholarship took Ambedkar to a place called Columbia University, continuing to lay the foundation for his journey and the further journey of this country and generations to come. But very conveniently, we have limited our leaders to symbols of poverty, symbols of a rose, a walking stick, an Iron Man. Never telling our children that these leaders, their journey was deeply rooted in education. And of course, never getting to the topic that education was defined by two fundamental things alongside the textbook knowledge. That was seva and samvad, service and communication, service and dialogue. That a Gandhi continued to be on the path of seva and samvad throughout. That people like Patel and Ambedkar and Nehru continued their dialogues and service all across this country. And that built that generation of leaders. But we conveniently choose to ignore it. And that is the reason why it is so important that we know this well, that the generation that puts its head down at a study table enables us to lift our head up. The space program in this country was built by a gentleman named Vikram Sarabhai, who not only, and I know many of you have gone through IIT coaching and you've been told at some point that focus only on this one thing. Vikram Sarabhai on one end built the space program in this country, and on the other end gave to this country what is India's fortress in management, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and institutions like Ahmedabad Management Association. IIM and AMA were given to this country by a Sarabhai. We of course spoke about Kalam, a gentleman who went to the highest in science and statesmanship and whatnot. But the way his conduct was, the character that he displayed was just unparalleled. And when I talk about Kalam, there are two things I want to talk about Kalam. And then I would largely conclude with the nation-building bit of it. Hopefully this spread is wide open in front of you now, the education and leadership spread. But there's something about Kalam I want to quote to you. There's a conversation that Professor Brahma Prakash, the mentor to Dr. Kalam, and Dr. Kalam himself were having. This was a conversation about spirituality. Because many of you might, after all of this, you can say that, oh, all was good and great. But you see, Swamiji doesn't feature in this. By the way, Swamiji is one of the only spiritual leaders who still features even if you want to run a successful business. But the deepest spiritual side of it, So Professor Brahma Prakash and Dr. Kalam have this conversation about spirituality that I really want to quote to you, where Professor Brahma Prakash says something interesting. He says, you see, the journey of a spiritual man and the journey of a non-spiritual man, both are the same. Both go on a holiday trip. The only difference is the spiritual man goes without any bag and baggage, and the non-spiritual man, who's also, by the way, on a holiday trip and can see there is no difference, goes with 28 pieces of bags and baggages. The non-spiritual man, who's at the same holiday trip as the spiritual man, because of this 28 pieces of bags and baggages, has a trip that is forgettable and miserable. The spiritual man has a trip that is unforgettable and memorable. And I think I have never read something so clear, so distinct. I read it as a child, and I like the case that they make. But they go on to make a very good definition of spirituality as the two of them discuss, where they define spirituality as something very simple. They say spirituality is purity plus perfection. Purity in thoughts, purity in action, purity in pursuits, and perfection in whatever pursuit that you take. Now, as engineering and science students, I do not think there is a definition more clear, more concise, more logical that can be put forward. Because way too many of us are inspired today by Steve Jobs and that he put on the same clothes every day, forgetting that in this country, our sages, since ages, have been doing exactly that, without any newspaper mention that our sages put on the same clothes to work every day. But when Steve Jobs does it or Mark Zuckerberg does it, we like to take that. We've forgotten quite easily that Bill Gates made a comment about Steve Jobs that the world is richer today because Steve Jobs did not choose to be the richest man in the cemetery. We forget that most of these people, ranging from Henry Ford to Bill Gates, did not get started in order to become billionaires. They identified a problem big enough or an opportunity big enough that could lift more people up. I speak with people who want to change the world and they're inspired by Bill Gates 2.0 more than Bill Gates 1.0 because they think that, oh, Gates Foundation is philanthropy, so that is social impact. Forgetting that by building Microsoft, Bill Gates expanded the global economy by hundreds of trillions of dollars and at the same time increased human productivity like very few things have. That also lifts people up. That is also the work of science. But with that purity and that perfection, if you try and solve a problem or make use of something to enable more people, that automatically makes you a billionaire. You don't have to choose between being a billionaire and getting something great done. So these confusions that we've built it for ourselves. If we start from within to outside, if the inner journey leads to the outer journey, we'll be better off. As we are having this conversation, the second story from President Kalam's life that I related to President Kalam's life that I wanted to quote is also very simple. And that shall draw me to the final and larger message I have for you today. The little told story about Rameshwaram, this is probably the least told story about Rameshwaram, that in 1963-64, a cyclone struck Rameshwaram and the only bridge connecting Rameshwaram with mainland came tumbling down. It was called the Pamban Bridge. And the responsibility to fix Pamban Bridge was given to a young civil engineer, 30 years old. He was given 180 days to connect Rameshwaram with mainland again. And when he asked his seniors and his gurus, they told him that 180 days is a joke. By no means will we be able to connect Rameshwaram with mainland India in 180 days. But you see, Rameshwaram is a holy city. It has great importance attached, and the Parliament of India started raising this question again and again. On the 45th day, when this question was asked in the Parliament, By when will we be able to connect Rameshwaram with mainland India? The parliamentarian answering that question without even knowing said, within 1 month this work will be over. While that might sadden many, to the surprise of our countrymen, on the 46th day, the headline in this country was that a 30-year-old civil engineer had fixed Pamban Bridge and connected Rameshwaram to mainland in 46 days, as opposed to 180. Now this young man did not just do that. He went on to build one of the most challenging rail lines in the world, the Konkan Railways, and gave to India what is India's pride and the world's envy, the Delhi Metro. E. Sridharan's first assignment was to fix Pamban Bridge. Something, the same ethos, same values, same character he would go on to exhibit in the next 5-6 decades of his career, a career that never seems to end. But there is something remarkable about E. Sridharan's life. When a book would be written on his life, it was not called the E. Sridharan. It was not called the civil engineer. It was not called the metro man. It was called the Karma Yogi. And that is something all across the world as Swamiji introduced yoga to the rest of the world. His message for young people was largely very focused on Karma Yoga. That a generation of Karma Yogis, dedicated people, can lift this country up, and through that, we can lift humanity up. And that is the reason why, if at all we want to talk about Swami Vivekananda and youth, if at all we want to talk about leading India in the 21st century, we need to be on that path of unselfish action, the path of selfless action, where each one of us take it as our responsibility to fix problems or to lift people up using our education. That is the idea of education and leadership that we started out with in the first place. But remember, you do not need to do something separate in order to change lives. What you are doing, if you do that right, we are better off. There is this wonderful, beautiful story of an American president who was briefed that within a decade we might be able to put a man on the moon. And this American president was going to deliver an address at Rice University. John F. Kennedy, the name was, the science-loving, nation-loving president, chose to announce this just that next day at Rice University, choosing a university as the announcement place for a project like this. No political platform, no podium that was of any other importance, that an educational institution. And he announced to America and the world that within a decade we'll put a man on the moon. But he didn't just stop there. He visited the NASA facilities where they were preparing to put a man on the moon. He met with the engineers, scientists, mathematicians, everyone. And he asked them questions, what are you doing? Someone said, I'm working on ignition. Someone said, I'm working on escape velocity. Someone said, I'm looking at the trajectory. In the meanwhile, he shook hands with a janitor, a sweeper, a cleaning staff. And he asked him, what are you doing? He said, sir, I'm putting a man on the moon. The President of the United States was shocked. He said, and sir, how are you doing that? So he said, sir, you see, this entire space that I have been assigned, I have to keep this place clean. If any piece of dust or dirt comes in, one of the machines will malfunction and we'll not be able to put a man on the moon. So my role is to keep this entire place clean so that we are able to put a man on the moon. That is what I'm doing. Now that is what leadership looks like. That is what ownership looks like. That is what service-oriented leadership should be. That is what the Harvard Business School, 100 years after Swami Vivekananda had already talked about it, introduced as a concept called servant leadership. We need to reclaim what is fundamentally ours. But I do not like that kind of reclaiming. You know, I was speaking at a conference, a seminar, that was about Indian ethos for modern management. And I was meeting a lot of people at that conference, in audience and others, who were telling me that our ethos are going away because of other people. You know, this is something I want to tell you as young, proud citizens of this country. if your patriotism comes because of the presence of a Pakistan or the presence of a China, there's a problem with your patriotism. If your love for our ancient wisdom comes because of your disgust or dislike or ability to blame some other culture, some other civilization, some other country, then there is a problem with your love for your civilization, with your love for your culture. We don't need a very bad student in order to be called a very good student. We don't need a very bad parallel in order to look good, be good, or like something. We need to claim what is fundamentally ours, and it is we alone who can claim it. It is not because of Germans that we do not apply our own wisdom. It is not because of the Japanese that we don't claim what is fundamentally Indian. It is not because of America that we forget what India is. It is because of us. Twitter warfare and dialogue and gatherings and conferences and conventions, no matter how many of those we do, nothing will make us true Indians and better Indians than finding that love within. A love for a fellow Indian that makes you more Indian. A love for a fellow man that makes you believe deeper in your own faith. A love for learning and leadership that makes you go to that wisdom, go to that text and take it forward. If your love for something that is fundamentally yours comes because of the presence of an adversary or presence of an parallel opposite, there's a problem. Because that is a shortcut to being more Indian. Blame Pakistan. Blame China. Blame America. There's a problem when you blame Western culture. That doesn't make you more Susanskrit or more Sanskarvan. Only good Sanskars can make you Sanskarvan. And that is an easy shortcut that we have taken in present day times. So we need to reclaim what is fundamentally ours without any dislike or disgust for anything on the outside. And when I say that, both the things find meaning. The first part of it, when we send our children to management colleges and tell them, you stay away from all this spirituality or this ancient Indian wisdom or text, not realizing there are IIMs in this country who have a motto that says, Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam. In this country, we say we've forgotten what is fundamentally Indian, not realizing that this is the only country in the world that is so blessed that its national motto comes from a sentence thousands of years deep, that comes from the Mundaka Upanishad, Satyameva Jayate. And that probably explains it very well. How we have conveniently chosen to ignore Satyameva Jayate when we can, but yet fight for Mundaka Upanishad somewhere else, trying to be more Indian because of that argument that you'll have. If that internalization cannot happen, that argumentation will not give you a tag of being more Indian, being more Bharatiya, or whatever it is. In this country, we celebrate the strikes in Balakot, forgetting that those protectors of our skies at the Indian Air Force, when they take off, they are inspired by the motto that is Nabha Sparsha Deeptam. That those who jump into our shores, dive in to protect us as members of the Indian Navy, they're inspired by the motto that is Shano Varuna. That in this country, everywhere, our institutions, even if we just look at those institutional mottos, they come from ancient India's greatest wisdom. And that can power the modern state forward. But it will never be able to do so if we choose to conveniently ignore it. If a badminton player wants to be a better cricketer, he can talk to a cricketer and learn a little bit of cricket. But if the badminton player forgets how to play badminton, I'm sorry, the cricket player cannot help. So if you were born in Germany or Japan, you could have turned towards India. If you are born in India, you need to turn inwards. And that is something you need to remember. The second part I was talking about that, but not with a disgust or dislike for other ideas, because it is this country where the father of the nation said something remarkable, where he said, I like to keep my doors and windows open, but I refuse to be blown away. That the Rig Veda, from where Swami Vivekananda brought that great defining mantra that has inspired a generations of nation builders across this country, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitayecha. That is the founding principle, founding idea, the mantra for Ramakrishna Math and Mission. From the same Rig Vedas comes this beautiful line that is, Ano Bhadra Kratvo Yantu Vishwata. Let noble thoughts come from all sides. But we are lost somewhere in this confusion that one, we try to be a better Indian by blaming China more. No, we will be better Indians by building India more, by serving Indians more. And the second part, that in order to be an Indian, you need to shut out Japan or Germany or America. If there is something good that we can put to use in lifting more people up, that is good. So with these concepts largely taken care of, I hope that as young, proud citizens of this country, we'll take it as a responsibility that our technology continues to do space exploration as well as we can. But at the same time, the same science fixes the problem of a traffic jam that our cities continue to have. The ability to broaden roads in villages without a new, entire different road having to be put up. That it makes sure that an ambulance has a separate lane to move forward. I hope your same economics, on one end, while it enables banks to make more money, also enables hardworking people in this country to have a little bit in their pocket as savings to put into education or healthcare of their children. I hope your education does not only give you a degree, but it also inspires you and challenges you. Even if you want to practice a little bit of ego for some time, the only ego I hope you'll practice is, you should fundamentally ask yourself that what use is my education if it does not lift someone up, if it does not solve a problem. Because as much as bad news your primetime television can give you, I have good news to share with you. These young bright kids who I work with at Dexterity, their idea of education is very simple, that their education should be a solution to a problem that the country faces. And so many of them have gone on to do remarkable things. They've received tens of crores in scholarships, they have started new organizations, they have been finalists and winners of competitions all across the world. But there's one story I want to end with. In Patna, I personally went to the house of a dexterity kid. The house was 8 by 10. That is probably half the size or smaller than your dorm room at IIT Madras. The entire family used to live in that. The child comes from this community that is called the Musahar community in Bihar. They are put in as Mahadalits. They are the poorest of the poor. This child, a dexterity kid, I visited his house, 8 by 10. I stayed there for some time. I spoke with the kid as well because he had, with great love, he had invited me. By the way, before that, he had done something. He had graduated from Dexterity School of Leadership and Entrepreneurship. That is a residential training program of leadership and problem solving, where we bring in around 60 kids from all across India and we train them as local role models. Because we believe in both cases, while we connect kids to opportunities and groom them as local role models, that while a Kalam is a great example, while a Sridharan is a great example, our villages need that first girl child who went to college, that first boy child who got a government job, that first college kid who started something of his own. They will raise the level of aspiration and achievement in these places. India has close to 700 districts now, used to be 650 at some point. Around 650 local role models also can lift this country up. It is not just pieces of legislation. It is not just prime-time fighting that is needed or that can do something. Sometimes I doubt that does more damage. But our goal is very simple, that even if it is, and at Dexterity we had a very simple idea. We said our impact will be seen between 2025 and 2035, when there will be a resurgence in the quality and numbers of leadership across this country. But we bring these children to these platforms because we know when they go back to their classroom will change because of them. Their school or local community or friend circle will change because of them. And one child's impact can have a tremendous impact on others. But I'll come back to this kid. So he's a graduate from that platform. And the first time he had invited me to his school. That is a school where only Musahar kids study. And in fact, the founder of that school recently received a Padma Shri. They had invited me to the the school because of something very unique they had started. They had started an English-speaking club in their own school where they decided they'll all read English, one book in English, one story book, and they'll all come and comment on it in English. So they had invited me for the first session. So I went to their school, sat on the floor with them. I had this wonderful session with them. After the session, I asked other kids that, like these 2-3 co-founders of this club, they have started this. What do you see in them? So they say, I thought they'll say leadership, initiative or something. They said that after they have come back from the program, now they are practicing entrepreneurship. So I said, what is entrepreneurship? So they said, entrepreneurship is when you identify an opportunity or risk, or you build something through which you deliver value. It can be commercial value, it can be like service, whatever it is, and it should be sustainable. So these things they were talking about. So I said, how do you know these words? So what is this value? What is this sustainable? What is this commercial? What is this impact? And these kids nicely, and we were having this conversation, and they were telling me all these things. So I asked them, how do you know all these things? So then they said that this kid and his friend, when they returned from deck school, for 8 evenings, they ran a deck school within their school in Hindi. And they told everyone everything they had learned. Of course, other things they shared, stories and everything, but they ran a deck school within the program, like within the school. So the second time he invited me to his house, I could have just not ignored it, because he said, my mother wants to see you, because my mother is very happy with me. She thinks that I now am a better kid. She wants to see you one time. He wrote an email very well worded, used words that one should not. So I went to the house, 8x10 house. This kid recently received a full scholarship of 42 lakhs to go to college. And I personally made sure that he got a flight to go to college. So I wanted to drop him. His entire family also wanted to come. But when this kid was going, I met him before he left. I asked him, what do you want to do now after this college education? He said, I want to go back to the locality that I live in. There only Musar people live, small houses. So I said, usually for me, when I talk about myself, I like to sacrifice as much as I can. When it is for our kids, I sometimes tell them that, see, 2-3 years you get some stability, then you dive in. Because if you will be at risk, then there will be a problem. So I told him that. He said, no, sir. And I want to leave you with this, because this is something very important. He said, sir, when my mother decided to send me to school, almost every day, everyone was waiting that now her child will do something that is dramatic. Or now her child will either fail. There were 2 things they were hoping simply. That either he'll fail and he'll be kicked out, or he'll become someone who's like such an outlier that he'll not be good enough for the community. So he said that my mother all those years only told me one thing, that, you see, I fought way too much to send you to school. So you work hard in school. Because if something happens, they'll all blame me. So he said, and a couple of times he saw that his mother, when he did something wrong, would not beat him, she would just cry. Because she fought with everyone just to send him to school. And he said that, sir, after school now I have come to college. If after college I leave, and if I don't do something that lifts people up, that goes and serves other kids, he said, so in simple words, he also said, I want to go back to my community and I want to do something that you are doing, but more residential and only for those children to begin with. So he said, if I do not go back, many of those children will not be able to study. 2, everyone will now tell my mother that after going to college, you see children go out of hand. So nobody will go, because some kids have started going to school, nobody will send their kids to college after that. Now that is the understanding an 18, 19-year-old child has. I hope, and this is not a made-up story, and I don't believe in made-up stories. But is not that child's mother very similar to Mother India? So many children put through school, so many put through college. Why should you, I know sitting at IIT we complain there are so many people who don't send their kids to school. Why do we not empathize with them? What kind of schools we want to send our children to? Who sometimes turn out worse off than better off. But that is a fundamental question we need to answer. And I want that you, all of us, bring a non-polarizing role model in our lives as well. Because sometimes you'll go and you'll tell someone that I like Kurian, I like Sridharan, I like Kalam, I like Gandhi, Nehru, Patel. People who have not read a single word from their lives, have not been able to recognize one good thing, will put you in a wrong category or put you in some category or the other. So that is where, by the way, the guiding force, the guru should continue to be Swamiji, it should come from Ramakrishna Vivekananda literature. The non-polarizing role model I want to give you for a second, and then we can get into Q&A, is the early man. We have all studied about early man, right? Have you read about early men and women? Adi Manav? Is this deep attention or good sleep? So, the early man, when he first saw fire, this person could have continued walking. This person could have run away. But the early man did something that I hope all of you will begin to do. He paused. He paused to see what was happening. I hope you'll begin to pause. Someone is in trouble. Someone is being bothered. You are being bothered by something. Someone needs help. I hope you will pause. The second part of it is that the early man did not just pause. He saw that this fire was keeping him warm and realized quick enough that few months later when winter comes, this fire can keep us warm. He saw that there were animals who would otherwise attack him who were running away from fire. And he realized that this fire can also protect us from these predatory animals. When the fire was done and dusted, he saw these vegetables that were burnt in fire tasted better when cooked. And he realized this fire can help us cook food. The early man, if he went to a college like ours, would have either kept it to himself, made it a trade secret, or patented it, or just sold it in the market. But this early man who had never been to a school and never been to a university did something that shall answer that fundamental question that way too many go through in this country without ever being answered. We never ask our kids in our school and we never tell them. And we never ask our kids in college and we never tell them, why do we send you to school? And why do we send you to college? But this example from early man's life, I hope that gives you clarity on that. The early man passed this knowledge onwards and forward to people living in different locations, people from different generations. And because he did that, some generation, we don't know which one, was able to make fire. Because of that generation, generations after that, and we know exactly which ones and which people were able to run a train on steam engine, make an aircraft fly on heat energy, amplify my voice right now with these microphones, transfer energy from one form to the other, postulate these theories, and continue to make advancements in physical sciences that lifted more people up. It is because of that passing one thing from one generation to the other. Each generation understanding that solemn responsibility of making things better for people in their generation and passing the planet a little better to the next generation. Those of us who are in college right now, when our parents, if at all they got to go to college, they could not FaceTime or video call, they wrote letters. But a generation decided to connect the world better. Thinkers decided to think about the best form of government. Freedom fighters decided to march and to rally. That is the reason why we stand here today. It should not be so easy to forget that fundamental question. Why do we go to school? And why do we go to college? And that is to make sure that we are contributing in making our generation a little better, passing on a better world to the generation that comes after us. There is no other way of nation building than learning from that janitor who was putting a man on the moon by keeping a headquarters clean, by learning from that civil engineer who at the age of 30 didn't see himself as too young or that task too separate. And this country is better off in public infrastructure, public transport, space sciences, internal defense, national security, dairy technology, in all these things, food production, because of the Swaminathans, Koreans, Sridharans, Kalams, Sarabhais. And it is better off because of millions of mothers across this country who are leaders, billions of citizens across this country who do lift other people up by delivering value through whatever expertise they have. At IIT, in that definition of leadership, which we talked about, delivering value through whatever expertise you have, we continue to expand that expertise year after year, decade after decade. You have the greatest opportunity to expand that expertise. I hope your expertise will lift more people out of poverty, teach more of our children better through better education technology platforms, put more kids through school through better policies you can write or assist in writing, take better care of elderly people and people outside our healthcare facilities through your sciences. But that alone, that task alone can take us forward. And I just want to repeat two things that Swamiji said and end. The first one, of course, is the national ideal of India that he talked about, renunciation and service. Next time you have hesitation in taking up an initiative, renounce that hesitation. Next time you have greed before taking up an assignment that serves more people and one that pays more money, renounce that greed. Next time you wonder whether you'll have enough comfort somewhere in the village that you came from, renounce that comfort. And the other one is service. Ask yourself every day that everything I have learned so far and everything I know so far, how can it serve someone, even if it is one person? It can be a tuition class. It can be at a research facility. It can be at a corporation office. But continue to remember those two ideals of renunciation and service. And never forget what Swami Vivekananda put together so beautifully. They alone live who live for others. Rest are more dead than alive. I hope at IIT Madras, you very well understand the challenges of 21st century. And none of those come from any avenue that is not either people-driven or people-created. And none of those stay unsolved if we get to work through whatever expertise that we have. But yes, it will take the character of a Sridharan, called a Karma Yogi in the biography. The conduct of a Kalam, who would be the same with a 5-year-old and a prime minister 5 years into office. The dedication of a Korean who would work with 9 Indian prime ministers. And the final, most expensive possession he had was a watch that his grandson had gifted him. So that character, that temperament, and that expertise, I hope you'll build. And that is the only way forward to lift this country up, quoting that ancient Indian wisdom well enough. It is this country that told the world, in the words of Maryada Purushottam Sri Ram, when he was in Lanka, he says, Api Swarnamai Lanka Name Lakshman Rochate Janani Jan Bhumischa Swargadapi Kariyasi. Where that faith, longing and love for that motherland came from within. Where we knew very well that a Lanka made of gold was yet not considered by our ancestors as more prosperous than Ayodhya. Because prosperity in this country is not just about those economic numbers or metrics. It has to be about prosperity of the people. It is in this country when 5 brothers fought a war against hundreds. And yet we call the Pandavas stronger because Dharma was on their side, because Bhagwan was on their side. That Dharma, that path of righteous action, if we can bring in, then yes, we can do problem solving. And yes, we can do leadership. And yes, we can put more kids through school and give people better health care and lift India so that it can lift humanity up. Thank you so very much. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.